The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, my name is Jillian Schaefer and I'm the Marketing Coordinator for SWK Technologies. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Hear How Arlen Ness Motorcycles Uses Avalara to Gear Up for Potential Audits, presented by John Kallas of Arlen Ness Motorcycles and Maria Tringali of Avalara. A little housekeeping before we get started. Everyone has been placed on mute to keep the background noise down. However, you can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar. To submit a question, look for the question section in your GoToWebinar. We will answer all questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording this presentation and it will be distributed tomorrow to all attendees as well as to those who registered but were not able to attend. Please take a moment during the presentation to answer our one poll question. And as a reminder, by attending this webinar, your next lunch is on us. All attendees will be sent a $25 Grubhub gift card by end of day tomorrow. With that said, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to attend our webinar. We're here to help you get the most out of your software solutions and help you find an easier way to run your business by providing you software and industry knowledge, tools, and support whenever you need it. We've invited Avalara here today because they are the industry experts on sales tax automation. So whether you're here doing research for a new solution or you're just here to learn, we'd like to encourage you to ask any questions throughout the webinar. Lastly, as a quick reminder, SWK is constantly sharing important updates and software tips and tricks on our social media channels, so we encourage you to follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Without further ado, I'll hand it over to Maria.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Thrilled to be here with you. Welcome. So today we're going to be talking about how to gear up for audits, or how to not worry about so much about sales tax compliance. We're going to translate. So thrilled to be here with John, and no, that is not a picture of John on your screen. This is actually a picture of John, the CFO of Arlen Ness. Welcome, John.
Hi, Maria. Thank you.
Great to have you here. As I mentioned, John is the CFO. He is also a CPA, finance director, wears a lot of hats over there at Arlen Ness, and we're excited to talk to him today about how they've been able to streamline their sales tax compliance and do other things with their time and resources and take this off of their worry list. So welcome again, John. Thrilled to be chatting with you today. And I'm Maria Tringali. I'm a manufacturing distribution specialist here. What I do all day long, every day, is talk with businesses like yours, work with our partners like SWK, and do webinars like this, and work with our internal teams on the importance of doing a really, really good job of managing these exemption certificates and what tax compliance really looks like for businesses that sell to other businesses, to buyers who want to be exempt from sales tax, whether it's because they're a reseller or because they're by nature an exempt business like a hospital or a manufacturer, etc. So this is sort of my specialty area. And again, looking forward to chatting with you today. So let's get started, John.
Sure.
Well, our agenda today is to talk with John a little bit about his experience with sales tax compliance, why he chose Avalara, and how that's working out for him, and maybe what best practices he has to offer. And then I'll wrap up with some best practices for tax compliance for businesses like manufacturers, distributors moving forward, and kind of a little bit about what we're seeing today, given a couple years post new economic nexus laws, as well as some of the challenges we're seeing during our sort of stay-at-home COVID era as well. So with that, John, this is something we quoted from you as we were chatting with you and preparing for this, but I'll quote you. They've been able to maximize limited resources and minimize their risks by automating sales tax compliance. So tell us a little more about that, John. What triggered your need for tax automation, and why is that important that you focus on other things?
Yeah, we're a small to medium-sized company with, our gross sales revenues they'll range, but, we're about a $20 million gross revenue company. So for those that are listening in on the webinar, you might have a company that's very similar in size. So when you have a company that's small to mid-size, you don't have a lot of resources in that company. All your staffs are probably being asked to do more with less. And when I came to Arlen Ness about 2.5, 3 years ago, they were trying to manage sales tax manually with very limited staffing and without the use of any other tools such as Avalara. And they were in 2 states, California and South Dakota. South Dakota, because of the famous Sturgis motorcycle rally. But we were manufacturing, we're one of the premier manufacturers of motorcycle parts, and we basically warehouse and ship from our 60,000 square foot warehouse in Dublin, California. And we distribute to both on the, and sell both on the retail and wholesale level. And that's throughout the United States, Canada, and Europe. And I think anybody who's been involved with sales tax realizes how complicated sales tax can be just within your own state or even within your own county. There's state sales tax, counties assess their own tax, as well as cities and local governments. So it's, for us, it was becoming overwhelming. And when I saw this, I just knew we needed to do other things other than try to manage sales tax multiple days out of the month. And we needed to minimize our risk, both at the company level, because we found ourselves, in some instances, calculating sales tax incorrectly. And then many people don't realize this: if you charge somebody sales tax incorrectly, you are obligated to refund those monies. So we needed to get out of all the corrections and the adjustments and all of that activity and uncertainty. The other thing that was a little bit of worrying is that depending on what state you're in, everybody should, understand what the state's rules are regarding responsible parties. And that means, some people falsely believe that just an officer of the company is responsible for sales tax if something goes wrong, and that's not true. It can go down all the way to the managers, and even lower depending if they meet the definitions that each state has for responsible person. And that person could be jointly and severally liable for the tax. So it was a little bit of concern seeing that. And if you're a CPA and you're the controller or CFO, you just want to get out of that risk area and see if you can automate things. So those were the initial issues that I was presented with. And then on that famous date of June 21st, 2018, the Supreme Court came out with the Wayfair decision.
I like how you have that memorized.
Well, it changed everything for us because it basically accelerated our decision to automate and move together with SWKs. We talked with them, asked them, recommendations, did some research on our own. And that's how we basically engage with Avalara
Awesome.
to help us with our automation needs. So just to give you an idea, when I first came on board, we were filing sales tax returns for California and South Dakota. Within 12 months after the Wayfair decision, we were filing in 4 states. Within 18 months, we were filing sales tax in 10 states. And within 24 months of that date, we're in 12 states. And we continually monitor that to see if we have to add additional states.
Wow. So that's actually a really good kind of segue into my next statement. Thank you for that. Totally makes sense. I think that in my experience, I talk to businesses like yours every day, John, and I hear people who have ignored this. 2 years later, so many manufacturers and distributors have really yet to understand whether or not those new laws in June of 2018 that were passed apply to their business. I think there was a misnomer in the beginning or misunderstanding when these laws were passed that they only were for online businesses. Well, the fact is that almost everybody nowadays, and you mentioned it too, ships stuff everywhere. We have the capability. It doesn't matter whether you're selling it online or over the phone or over the fax machine. if you're shipping an item into somebody else's state, if you hit a threshold, that state wants a cut of that. So this is something I want to bring up, that just even the concept of nexus, some companies aren't familiar with that. And you're a CPA, John, so you're kind of ahead of a lot of people, but a lot of family-owned businesses have operated in the manufacturing world and don't have the expertise that you have. And so just from a very basic level, nexus is the relationship that you have with the state that requires you to collect and remit sales tax to them. It essentially means you're doing business in some way in that state. And that little box on the gray side, the little gray box on the right side, excuse me, shows all different ways that you can actually establish nexus in a state, all different ways. The one John's talking about is economic nexus. And economic nexus has been sort of had the biggest effect on manufacturers, distributors, otherwise exempt businesses over the past few years, as John mentioned. Basically, the state is mentioning what is your level, measuring what is the level of economic activity that you have in that state. It no longer matters whether or not you have inventory or a salesperson residing in that state to require you to register. It's how much are you selling into that state. In general, the transaction and revenue volumes are 200 transactions and $100,000 over a 1-year period. But of course, every state is able to create their own laws. So that is not a blanket statement. That is what a lot of states have chosen to do, but states have very, very different rules. And then when it comes to exempt sales in our world, some states require that those exempt sales are included in that total, and some don't count that in the total. Some count resale, but not other exempt. So each state has a little bit different twist on the laws that they've created. So it's important. And you'll probably hear me say this 6 times, John, and I don't know if you did, maybe you could tell me if you did a nexus study in the beginning when you got there. How did you determine what states to register in?
Yeah, we basically did a data dump of our database. And at the time when we were doing it, a lot of the states were still trying to define their law regarding sales tax.
Okay, so yeah, you were early on. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were a little bit, even though the waiver decision had come out, every state was trying to react to that decision. Mm-hmm. And in their, various thresholds. And as you mentioned, every state came up with a slightly different twist on that. Mm-hmm. And we did a data dump of our sales to determine what states we were selling into. And we literally did a by state analysis. We knew we didn't really meet, other than South Dakota, meet the nexus criteria in any states. We had no presence there, no property, no employees. We were strictly in California. That made it a little bit easier. That we just had to identify our sales activity. And you're correct in saying, it gets complicated because every state, they're looking to grab the companies into their net. They want those companies reporting to them. And, in this day and age of limited revenues that the states are always faced with, they're looking for different revenue streams, and sales tax is one of them. And you just have to be very aware state by state what their criteria is, both on the sales, as you mentioned, and transactions. Some of them are, and you have to meet both. Some of them are, and then some of them have different exemptions, where you can exclude wholesale transactions, or in some cases, you have to include all your transactions and all your sales. So it can get, very difficult.
Exactly. Yeah, what John said. So what's on the screen there just shows you a little bit of an example. There are 46 states in our union that do require sales and use tax to be collected. 44 of those have economic nexus laws. So that's quite a bit. Now, Arlen Ness is pretty lucky to have John on staff, who sounds like he's pretty darn familiar, maybe even more than me, with these laws, and was able to do an independent study himself. I would venture to say that most businesses that I talk to, and I probably talk to 3, 4, 5 a day, don't have the expertise of John on staff, and or they may also have some kind of presence. John, you were lucky to say, okay, we didn't have a physical presence outside of this state or these couple of states, so we only have to worry about economic nexus. Unfortunately, a lot of businesses, because they're highly exempt, might have a small presence in that state. They might have an employee, they might have salespeople, they might even have 1099 or contract salespeople. So they really had established a physical presence prior to these laws being passed, but because most of their business is exempt, they kind of just wanted to skate under the radar, didn't really worry about it. They figured they could handle it in time of an audit. Well, these laws really have changed that. You can no longer kind of get by on hoping nobody finds you. As John just mentioned, businesses are looking for tax. They always have been, but now with COVID, every year, I'm sure your own community is short on income and resources. So states are getting even more aggressive. And yes, that does include manufacturers and distributors. So if there's one thing that I'll probably say 27 times on this call today, is if you have not already, please do a nexus study like John described. You can do it with a CPA practice that has a SALT, a state and local tax division to them, not your local CPA. They don't do sales tax. They do income tax and other kinds of taxes, but not sales and use tax. Or you can do it with someone like Avalara, an organization that specializes in sales and use tax compliance. Or if you're in John's case, if you're in John's world, and you want to do a self-study, Avalara has a great website that expands on what you're seeing on the screen there. But my big advice to everyone today, if you have not done this already, please take the time to understand your nexus footprint in this, as I call it, the post-economic nexus world 2 years later. Would you agree, John?
Yeah, it comes down to complexity. Everyone knows their own business. So if you're starting to read the rules and you're getting this blurry feel to your business, probably need to look out for some help. But if you're CPA and you have the time and you have the resources inside to at least do the first pass of the study, that might help, and then reach out to your accounting firm or somebody like Avalara and contract out.
Yeah, thanks, John. And so my first kind of best practice words of wisdom, and you mentioned this, John, are you now registered in all states? How many is Arlen Ness registered in now?
We're registered right now in 12 states with one state kind of on the radar. We're watching the transaction levels and sales levels.
Exactly. Right. So my first best practice of the day is what John just said. Is you not only do you need to look at your past exposure to determine where to register like John did, you have to monitor this on an ongoing basis as well. Say some other organization starts a big rally in Texas, John, and you're not registered there already, and you start selling a lot of product there, you have to start watching whether or not you might hit those thresholds. So as our world is changing right now, with COVID, a lot of businesses I talk to have changed direction or added products and services, or adding B2C online, or even adding B2B online. You do need to keep track of your nexus footprint moving forward. So make sure you've done a past look, but you also have a way. And with a platform like ours, this is actually a screenshot of our dashboard, which you've seen, right, John?
Yeah, it's right there, right on the front page when you log in. It's one of my favorite tools.
Yeah, so it tells you, so you can see in my little example here, Alabama has turned yellow. So it would tell John that he's at 88% of the threshold, which means that's a warning state for him. So the orange are ones where he's already hit it and he's registered there in his case. But it does give you a little warning light there to say, hey, we need to probably watch this. It might be a state we want to register in. Or maybe it was a blip, maybe it was a one-time thing, but it does give you that sort of a heads up. So however you do that moving forward, you need to make sure you're also doing a check of your exposure moving forward, which again is different in the past. Most of us just said, oh, we didn't have to worry about registering anywhere, except for maybe when we hired a new employee in a new state, like a remote employee, which of course is happening more and more now. But now you have to monitor that with your economic nexus exposure as well. So you talked about this a little bit already, John, but maybe a couple more insights on why Avalara specifically. What was it about us that piqued your...
After all of our research, I think we were looking for ease of use and a simple implementation, which we did get with Avalara. We did work with Avalara on the implementation into our ERP system, which it basically plugs in. We use Sage 100C, and between Avalara and SWK's help, we were very quickly, Avalara was installed very quickly into our system and up and running. And for the listeners on this webinar, I don't know if you realize it, but every transaction, once you're signed up with Avalara, every transaction in your ERP system basically will get uploaded into Avalara's cloud. And that's how these dashboards come into play. It's monitoring all your transactions, all the ship to addresses, understand what state your exposure is in. And it's building on that history. So the longer the more data that accumulates, the better those dashboards will be. So, it may take 6 months, 8 months, 12 months to get some really good data into those dashboards, but it is all going up into Avalara and being used there. A couple of other things was just compatibility also with our website, our e-commerce platform, which is on Shopify. There's a Avalara plugin for that, and that was a plus. So now we've got our e-commerce platform and our ERP all speaking to Avalara and computing the same taxes and not having any differences. So we've got accurate rates now. The automation of our tax returns every month was a big plus. We don't have to we do review them. We get alerts from Avalara. It's time to review the sales tax returns in each of the states. We go in there, make any adjustments if we need to make adjustments. We are able to monitor the additional state exposure like you had on your other slides. And then one of the other things that was a big plus to us as we started adding states is that Avalara is a streamlined sales tax certified provider. And that's, you'll see that if you're out there reviewing the various states called a SST state. And these states have formed together kind of an alliance, and where they are covering the cost of registration, sales tax calculation, the return preparation, the filings. So if you are in states and the states that you have to remit to are streamlined sales tax, you can sign up with Avalara under the SST program, and there's very little cost to you as a company. So we've got about, I think, 7 of our 12 states are SST states. So that was a big advantage to us also. And then lastly, we also use Avalara's Cert Capture product, which allows us to manage all the exemption certificates. And it's more than just a place to accumulate these certificates. It's proactive in that you can monitor certificates that are going to expire. You can monitor certificates that are missing. You can easily send out emails to the various customers and attach the appropriate state forms to the email automatically, which are provided by Cert Capture, and request that information back. So it makes things a lot easier on that administration of the exemption certificates. So those are probably the main reasons why we chose Avalara, and for us, it's working very well.
Oh, that's great to know. I'm a Cert Capture geek. I love that product. So I think you kind of touched on both of these together, but any other sort of thoughts on how your compliance has improved by having that whole package that you've described? Have you notably saved time? Have you been in a sales tax audit since then? Those sorts of things.
Well, knock on wood, we haven't been under a sales tax audit under Avalara. We have gone through them prior to Avalara, but just from the various reporting, the sales tax returns that are there, I can only imagine that an audit is going to be a lot easier to get through because of the documentation that's there. So I'm not looking forward to it, but I think we'll be better prepared as a company if we do have to.
Right.
On the compliance side, just getting all the returns done for every state. Every month, it was taking us at least 3 days out of the month to make sure we had all the transactions, get the returns prepared, look for any exemptions, just get all of that together. Even, probably we could have spent every week different amount of time, but just chasing customers for exemption certificates, making sure all of that was entered into our system. All of that has been streamlined now. We spend very, very little time on any of that. And I would say once a month, we're spending maybe an hour reviewing the tax returns once we get the alert from Avalara that they're ready for review, and hitting the approve button, and it just moves through the process seamlessly. And we know it's being done correctly as long as we're feeding the right information into the system, and we don't have to worry about missing deadlines for filing of returns and making payments.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate the candid feedback there. I have a question for you, since I am the certificate girl. Can you tell me what's different about, and you don't have to go into CertCapture, I'm going to kind of talk about that in a little bit, but as far as the exemption certificates themselves, what was Arlen Ness doing prior to you joining and adding Avalara versus what you have to do now? I'm asking because I see that in my conversations every day, a lot of people minimize the importance of those documents, and they also save them as a piece of paper under a desk and sort of never look at them again. So can you give us a little bit, and maybe I'll go to my words of wisdom slide here. Can you give us a little bit of sort of before and after when it comes to those certificates and the importance of them from a CPA's perspective?
Yeah, well, we have a lot of banker boxes with 3-inch black binders of certificates that are stored from all the historical certificates that we've ever collected over the history of the company, even before I got there. And, once you get a certain volume of certificates, even though you try very hard to alphabetize them and get them into one spot, very hard to find them. Certificates go missing. It's very difficult to track the certificates. In some states, the certificates expire. For example, Florida, each certificate's only good for that year, so you have to follow up with a customer. So none of that was really being done, and none of it really had to be done because we were in California. But in California, certificates people can withdraw. Certificate may not be valid any longer. So they were collecting certificates, putting in a number directly into Sage under the AR profile. And there we even found over the years, a lot of garbage that was input into those fields that wasn't being done correctly. Sometimes a number wouldn't be put in. Somebody had typed the words exempt instead of putting in the actual certificate number. So, that was one of the things we had to do when we went live. We had to scrub our data. We had to make sure we had proper addresses, certificate numbers, things like that. But CertCapture made it much easier to manage that whole process.
And now you don't really think about it. I mean, you collect them digitally, right? Now?
Yeah, we collect them. CertCapture allows you to scan them and upload them into the system. And when you do request information from the customer, you can send them an invite to log into CertCapture and load that information. And then you get an alert it's been done, and you then verify it. Or you can send them a request with the forms, and they can send the forms back, and you upload those into CertCapture. CertCapture then does link and sync up with the ERP system in Avalara to make sure that all the information is correct and the customer does show as being exempt in CertCapture, it will sync with your ERP and Avalara to make sure tax isn't calculated on the transaction.
Yep. So it's no longer in that banker box. So that's good to know. But that's the way everybody has them now. I mean, most companies, unless they've automated with something like CertCapture, which is actually not all that common, so that people still have them on pieces of paper. And I think that in our current remote world, that challenge has probably been exacerbated over the last 6 months or so. I'm not really sure how businesses are going about collecting them and storing them at the moment and where they are. And they're probably in someone's office who's no longer in that office too. So definitely new challenges. Well, thanks, John. If you have anything else, I'm going to kind of run through my best practices, which definitely align with your words of wisdom. But feel free to jump in and add how Arlen Ness has handled any of these things, anything else that you think of. So, kind of summarizing what John has talked about is, and we talked about audits a little bit, is knock on wood, John's company has not been audited lately, but the data shows us that manufacturing is one of the top 3 industries to get targeted for sales and use tax audits. And the reason is it is super easy, John, you can verify this, to catch businesses on undocumented exempt sales, right? It's easy for them to be missing, expired, can't find them, never collected them, collected the wrong form. What did you just say? Some people just say, I'm exempt. Right?
Yeah. The other area there too is use tax. So as a manufacturer, we'll have tools, molds, dies, different things that we'll purchase for our manufacturing process that we'll owe use tax on. And we have to add them to the return if that transaction happened during the month. So a lot of times manufacturers will get the trigger for any missing tax will be related to use tax as opposed to sales tax. So it's one thing we also can capture through the Avalara monthly process.
Yep, that's bullet number 2 there. All right, so undocumented exempt sales, failure to remit use tax, and the third is what we just talked about, nexus. I can't even speak today, John. Failure to remit in states where nexus was established. That is people not paying attention to their nexus footprint. So I know that a lot of businesses say, oh, I'm a small manufacturer up here in the northwest corner of South Dakota or whatever, and they won't find me. Well, they will find you. We have the internet now. And sometimes depending on how you deliver, if you deliver in your own trucks, or you just never know what could trigger an audit. John, you're a CPA, can probably speak to this better than I. But it does happen, it can happen, and there's just really no reason anymore with all of the automation that we have out there to not really improve your tax compliance so that you don't have to worry about these things. You know that your exposure is going to be minimum, as John already mentioned. If you do get audited, you have everything right there in your dashboard at your fingertips. Another thing John has just explained to us, right on cue, thank you, is the next thing is have an end-to-end compliance automation solution. We have so many businesses that come to us and just want to talk about tax rates. I call tax rates, John, the sexy part of tax compliance because it's what we see, it's what's on our receipts, it's what we're familiar with as consumers is sales tax, and that means a sales tax rate calculation. But when we're talking to businesses who sell to highly exempt sales, it's not always about those tax rates. The bigger value, and what percent of your business is exempt, John, ish?
Surprisingly, I would say about 85% of our business is exempt.
Okay, right. So that is the bulk of your tax compliance, right? That is where your compliance needs to be focused. So in John's case, he only has to calculate tax on 20% of his sales. So be thinking, my other advice is think about your full compliance requirements, not just tax rates. People will tell me every day, oh, we already collect the certificates. We don't need any help with that. But the fact is that's 80% of your compliance in John's case. And most businesses I speak to every day, by 75, the average is 75% and up, and a lot of times 99% exempt. Those documents are extremely valuable to your business. That getting a tax rate wrong is minor in a sales tax audit, where a missing certificate can be costly. So I talk about that because the process really needs to start with your customers. So what we're talking about is moving you from this paper world, and if you could see me on camera, I'd be talking with my Italian hands. What you have right now is paper or PDFs, which are one-dimensional documents. You need to move into the digital world. There's not much paper left on our desks. One of the things left happens to be these exemption certificates, which again are super valuable. The process of getting these up to date and into the digital world is going to start with your customer. So one of the things I often see missing as we're looking to move to a compliant solution, or if your Nexus footprint has expanded like John's did, they forget about the customer experience. So a platform like CertCapture or an automated platform is going to allow you to make that process of moving your customers and yourselves from the paper world into the digital world super easy. You need a platform that communicates directly with your customers, as John mentioned, CertCapture does, and allows you to capture an updated certificate from them on the fly and get it into your system. So we want to make that transition for them really smooth. So probably in John's case and in everyone's case on the phone here, if you do have expanding Nexus, so let's say you have to add 2, 3, 10, 20 more states to your Nexus footprint, think about this. Your customer in that state has been buying from you for years without having to provide you documentation to not charge tax or pay tax. They've been exempt because you simply didn't have Nexus there. Now your footprint has changed. Now you have to go out and interrupt a business, a loyal business that's been buying from you for years, and ask them for documentation. So it's not scalable to do that at the time of the next sale. People think that's the way they'll do it. It's not really practical to stop a sale and say, hold on, I have to charge you tax. Can you provide me paperwork? And that buyer says, oh, yeah, I got to go to accounting. And you basically hold up the sale at that point. So when you do this conversion, you want to be proactive. You want to go out to them before they make their next purchase from you, request, update the documentation, and then have the valid certificate in the system, as John mentioned, so that you're confident it's there and you have a platform tracking expiration dates, renewals, and that sort of thing moving forward. So I have these I call these little orange people over there. One of the things that Avalara offers, so where it says Avalara Managed Services, one of the things that we offer is the services. I don't think you took advantage of this, John, but we do offer a service to help you convert from that paper into Pixels world. So if you don't have the expertise that John and his team has, a good partner is going to also help you make that conversion. So once that piece is done, when you have those certificates collected and they're in the platform, as John already mentioned, ideally you want all of your systems. So John has Sage and Shopify, but any system that you run, it could be QuickBooks, it could be Oracle, it could be SAP, wherever you calculate tax and or create an order and do a tax determination, all of those platforms should be connected to your sales tax compliance provider. So that's a little Avalara here in the orange cloud. So Avalara lives in the cloud, and we have over 1,000 now integrations with systems. So which is pretty much, if you operate an ERP, we have a pre-built connector to it, which is what we have for Shopify and for Sage, as John mentioned, but we can connect to anything out there, so that every time you create a quote or an order in any of your invoicing platforms, that platform makes a tax determination call over to Avalara. And the first thing it does is checks to see if that customer is exempt. As that customer is exempt from sales tax, we do not proceed with a sales tax calculation. What we do, though, is we do stamp the order to our admin console. So we're still recording that sale, which is how we're able to file those returns. Now, if the customer is taxable, so they do not have a certificate or that certificate is expired, then the platform is going to go ahead and calculate tax. So in John's case, for about 20% of his sales, we are going to do a tax calculation. The balance, we're just going to record that sale, and that's what allows us to complete those returns. So when John did his setup of Avalara, he told the software, Avatax, what returns he has to file in what state, which form, and what's the filing frequency. And the platform literally completes those forms. So now it only takes him an hour to go in and audit those forms, upload his use tax, audit those forms, and basically hit the approved button because we're connected everywhere that he calculates tax. So a long way around of saying tax compliance for us in the manufacturing and distribution world covers everything, not just this middle pillar here. Don't think you just need sales tax rates. You have customer experience and those exemption certificates and added returns that need to be taken into account. Diving in a little bit further, it's also really important that your certificate management platform be an intelligent digital platform. We can no longer sustain just having pieces of paper in those binders that John had. It's not a practical way in our digital world to manage the exempt portion of your tax compliance footprint. You need a platform that is really going to improve buyer satisfaction. It's going to help your team. So John, tell me, before you had to collect these and know what you were looking at, right? Before you had cert capture?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Did your team know what they would, do they know what the resale certificate looks like in Oklahoma?
You know, not, they definitely knew what they looked like in California, but as we moved into all these different states, you know, every state had a different form, and they all, you're right, they did look different. So we had to educate our sales team as to what to look for. And, you know, that, you know, one of the words of wisdom is when you're going through this process, work with everyone who's a stakeholder in the process and make sure they understand what you're trying to do and what you're requesting of your customers. Because your frontline salespeople, if you do have a sales team, they're the ones that are going to be requesting this information a lot of the time. So they need to know why it's being requested now when it hadn't been for the last 10 years.
Oh, well, there's that. Yeah, right. There's that too, for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
That's actually really sage advice. And maybe when I leave out a little bit, I talk a lot about the seller experience and say the credit manager setting up the account. But that's really good addition to things I talk about is your remote team, your sales team really needs to understand why we're collecting it. So even if you as a company have sent the email, your salespeople are often the person in touch with that buyer and probably need to support that process. So I know a lot of people will say, but I already have a document management system. In fact, I was literally on the phone today with somebody who uses, was it a Sage document management? I can't recall, sorry, the platform, but somebody this morning that has a document management system in place. So I always like to point out that document management is not compliance management. It is a place to store a one-dimensional image of a piece of paper. It's one step up from the binders that John referred to. It's not a platform that reduces risk for your organization, that can communicate directly with your customers, that can identify what should be completed so John's team doesn't have to know what the certificate looks like. It can't validate a document or the data on that document. It certainly can't report on the individual pieces of data on the documents. You might be able to set it up to a trigger for an expiration date, but that's typically about it. Definitely can improve customer experience and for sure doesn't create compliance workflows. So I encourage you to look at, as we're in the digital world now, document management is not compliance management. It is literally storing images. In order to move into the 21st century and support all of these new laws, we really need to think about turning those paper that we used to collect into digital format. And that's what John's company has done. They don't have those binders anymore. They now have all of their certificates and the data on those certificates in digital format, easily reportable, easily trackable. If an auditor comes in, they could easily ask John, can you show me the certificates that you had on file for these sales, for these companies on these specific dates? John, you can pull it up in 30 seconds, right?
Absolutely.
Yep. So that's what you want. And one of the things, actually, I was talking with a CPA friend the other day, John. One of the things that she pointed out was that a lot of times people file these alphabetically, but in a sales tax audit, they ask you for sales by date. So it makes it much harder to go find the certificate if you haven't filed up alphabetically. I thought that was an interesting observation, but she's like, yeah, that's what I have to go look through for my clients. I have to go pour through documents. So John mentioned this as well, this online wizard. So you want to encourage your customers to not, your buyers to not provide you with paper, but to provide you with a digital version. So we have online digital capabilities. So that email that John mentioned the request that you send to your customer literally has some known information. So you can see over here on the left, this is a screenshot of the platform. It holds, so pretend I'm the buyer. It knows I'm from California, and it knows my reason for wanting to be exempt is resale. So when I hit the next button, it literally pulls up this little screenshot on the right, which it pulls up a copy of the California resale certificate, fills in some of the pre-known information. All I have to do is add additional information, my tax ID permit, what type of business, what I'm selling to John, and then hit the next button, and that information goes right into John's CertCapture platform. So you're skipping the paper step, and you're verifying that the customer's filling out the right form. This is a digital version of that California resale certificate here. So you're taking the guesswork out from your customer perspective and your staff perspective. We already talked about this a little bit. Avalara has the capability to help you move from paper into digital, or you can do this project yourself as John did. But you need to move, you need to think about the process of moving from paper into digital and taking advantage of any resources you can. And this is just my sort of last slide that I love to show when I talk with businesses like yours. Is I always say, print this one out and put it up on your the board in your conference room. And John, I expect these are things that you thought about too, is how many states we need to register in, what is the value of these certificates, what % of my business is exempt, is my current process scalable, what's the quality of what I have now? John, I'm sure you can comment on this. I'm sure you asked yourself a lot of these questions when you first started at Arlen Ness.
Yeah, you know, every one of those are probably on my words of wisdom list. I would say that, you know, your quality of your existing database is going to be key in how you move forward. It's going to help you determine whether you have nexus. It's going to help you determine the economic thresholds in each of the states. So you may want to spend a little time and scrub that data first. You know, look at the information, look at customer addresses, state codes, look for inconsistent data, missing data, because that's going to help you run through a lot of these points and alleviate a lot of the stress and anxiety as you move down through the process. And I think, you know, that first bullet point, how many states do you need to register in? You know, try to get as comprehensive as you can up front. You don't want to go through this process various times throughout the year. You want to basically do it and then monitor for new states. And you also make sure you're looking for those SST states, which will be a big benefit to you going forward.
Right. Yeah, I didn't have an SST slide, so thank you for bringing that up. That is definitely ask when you chat with your CPA or with Avalara, whether that's a good program for you. I'm glad you were able to take advantage of that, John. It's a brilliant program.
Yeah, the only other thing I have in addition to this is timing. It can be somewhat complex, but don't expect it to happen overnight. Leave yourself, you know, a little time to make the evaluation. And even once you sign up with Avalara, give yourself 60, 90 days to go through the process. You know, you do have to get into the queue at Avalara. You do have to work with maybe your software vendor or somebody like SWK who's going to give you some, you know, help desk support and getting everything loaded into your system. And I would just, you know, give yourself enough runway to get the process completed. I would say easily 60, 90 days at a minimum.
Oh, yeah, I would agree. We usually recommend about 90 days to plan for that. And you remember that, as John's already mentioned, collecting these certificates from your customers who have not had to provide them in the past is a little bit cumbersome and time consuming, and you're kind of at the whim of them responding back to you. So you need to allow a little bit of time for that. So with that, Jolene, I think we've got about 10 minutes for questions. Thank you so much, Sean. I'm going to put up, oops, let me share my screen here. I'm going to put up another slide. Avalara does have a online sales tax risk assessment, or as I mentioned earlier, if you have a CPA firm that has a SALT practice, or if you're lucky enough to have a John on staff, my advice, remember, is make sure you understand those states and where you need to register, and that does kind of spur on what your next steps would be, as John mentioned, so we can form a solution. So Jolene, thank you so much. John, thank you so much for being here. We're delighted you're an Avalara customer, and I will see if there's questions out there.
Yep, thanks for the invitation. I enjoyed talking to everyone.
Thanks, Maria and John. We'll now open it up for questions. If you have any questions, please enter them into the questions section of your GoToWebinar. And while we're waiting for those to come through, I'll launch the poll. And it does look like there were a couple questions that came through during the presentation, John and Maria. The first being, what has been the biggest benefit that your company has felt since implementing Avalara?
That's for you, John.
Yeah, I would say it definitely, it's two. We were able to maximize limited resources within the company and mitigate risk associated with sales tax. I just can't emphasize that enough. The risk assessment or the risk associated with not processing sales tax correctly, especially this environment, it's just too great. So I believe, you know, those two were the biggest benefits to us.
Great, and we have another. I came in a little late, so forgive me if you covered this, but what was the implementation process like for Avalara?
It wasn't complex. It was a bit time consuming because we did have to scrub our data. You know, we needed to take a look at that. And that's when we knew our data was that we didn't have any, you know, real outliers in there any longer. Then we basically did our analysis, looked at all the states we were selling into, and then identified the customers that were associated with those sales. Once we knew that, then we were able to move forward with Avalara and sign up. The technical side of it, of getting Avalara on board, was almost seamless. Between Avalara and SWK, it wasn't an issue at all. Most of the process was involved with reviewing data, determining nexus, determining the economic thresholds in every state.
Perfect. Give me 1 minute. Perfect. Thank you so much, John and Maria, for your informative presentation and for taking the time to be here today. For more information on Avalara, please check out our website at swktech.com and click on Avalara under the Sales Tax section in the Products tab. Thank you everyone for attending our webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day.